Okay, so hello and welcome to our first methods chat this summer term. And the fact that this day falls on St. George's Day and the book day, as Carla mentioned, at the same time is a perfect opportunity to talk about poetry. So I think let's start and let's introduce Felipe Sanchez from the Lancaster University in the UK. I saw that you did your master in educational psychology at the Universidad Católica de Chile. And you're currently a doctoral researcher at the Lancaster University. Your research focuses on learning theories, learning experiences, and art-based qualitative methodologies, which is also part of the topic today. Welcome, Felipe, and I would say let's start the methods chat with an introduction into the methodology, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think could be good. The chat. I have the chat open just in case anyone sends something over there. If not, Sylvia, you can let me know. Okay, so the chat today is about poetry in research, which is not the same as to say that someone needs to be great at doing poetry or having studies in poetry to use poetry in research. So this is a bit amateurish talk. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be, the first thing is to say that you don't have to be a pro to use arts and art-based research to do anything like this. So this is me taking a photo somewhere. I don't like saying much about myself, and I think Sylvia said a lot of nice things, so we'll leave it there. So my work is around I would say, learning to experience teaching. That's what I would say. And I focus on early career academics. So the main question for my doctoral research is, how do early career academics in higher education learn to experience their teaching? So the idea is that the question includes not only what, in the sense of what is it that they experience, or what is it that they learn, but how that experiencing is in itself learned, is itself inscribed in a learning process. So in other words, the idea is to understand the different elements that teachers articulate into their experience of learning how to teach in higher education. That's like another way of phrasing it. So that's the overall project, which I won't say much more about that, so that we can get into this idea of art-based research. So to some, art-based research could be another paradigm. Like some might argue that it's different from qualitative research, others inscribe it within qualitative research. To be completely honest with you guys, I'm not gonna say that I am 100% in one or the other. At times it does feel pretty different epistemologically, and at times it feels similar, especially with more constructivist, postmodern qualitative research. It might be more similar. So it's probably in a spectrum is towards the more relational understanding of research, I would say. So art-based research includes anything in which the research uses art, right? So if, say, we use art as a prompt to talk about things or to generate data, that is art-based research in one sense. If the product of our research comes in an art form, then it's also art-based research. So there are multiple ways of doing it. But what it's for sure is that we understand art in a way that is socially constructed, right? So art is constructed by the artist. So when an artist organizes an experience into a particular form, that is what we would call art. And this art form would intentionally promote a very specific way of re-experiencing, over-experiencing whatever it is, the experience that we're researching or reconstructing through the research process. So it sounds strange, but basically what we're saying is that we are doing research on a concept, phenomenon, idea, whatever, right? And when we are doing the research, we reconstruct it. We reconstruct it in a particular way. So the art form, what would do in that research is to provide a way of reconstructing that concept in a sense that is similar to the concept we want to reconstruct. So with this idea, which is what I roughly argue in a chapter that I published by the end of last year, we would be creating an experience. So we will be creating the experience under research, right? And at the same time, the research or the product or the product of research would be an experience as well. So when this is in the book Art as Experience from John Dewey, he extends this much better, obviously, than I do. But the basic premise is that when an artist wants to discuss, say, sadness, it's not that they talk about it, they do something, they do the stuff that produce sadness. So when you hear a sad song, it's not that people are trying to tell you, be sad. They're producing that sadness in you with the song, through the song, right? So in a similar sense is what we're trying to do with art-based research. In particular, in my research, I use poetic inquiry, which is one form, it's like an umbrella term to say anything that includes poetry to do research. I would say that probably the biggest champion of this was Carl Lego. He died 2021. But he's still highly cited because he's probably the one that inspired most of us. And the idea is that poetry expands the frontiers of words, conveys different meanings, more complex understandings. Is that idea that when we use words, when we use language poetically, we're trying to say more. We're trying to go almost against that idea of precision, of being exact in research, in science, and we go sort of to the other side to be maybe more ambiguous. Again, there are plenty of ways to use poetry in research. One is to represent, reinterpret data. The other one is to collect data, collect field notes, which is really cool, by the way. There are different ways of doing it. People that are really probably on the top of this are Sandra Faulkner. She's one of the probably the most famous people doing this stuff. And probably one of the earliest shows of this is what Glesne called Poetic Transcription, which is an example and is quite similar to what I do. So how does it look like? I want to show you some of the people, say, lesser known, because probably the well-known, you're going to find them when you search poetic inquiry or poetic transcription on Google. You're going to find them quite easily. So let's bring out some of the less known people. So this person is showing you how to put poetry in the conclusion of their work. And so this person used poetry written by, I think it's a him, could be wrong, or let's say them, written by them to rework or go through again the research, and did it in a poetic way. So this is one way of doing it. This is how it looks like. This is published. This is another one, more recent, by, let's correct me with the German here, I would say Gerlich, but could be wrong. So this is another example. This is they deep dive into the analytical framework of the paper. So this is how this researcher chose to use their data and rework it into poetry. So this is a poem made out of the empirical material, and it looks like this. So this is a bit of the poem. This is not the full poem, but this is a bit of the poem. As you can see, this is not, we would say, fantastic poetry, right? It doesn't, so out of the top of my head, I would say this doesn't have full stops, commas. If you would read this out loud, you have to read a full sentence until the end. You probably won't be able to breathe at some point. So this is not brilliantly written, right? But it is pretty well written for what we want to do. This is, let's say, a monologue from someone who's trying to tell us something about their work. And this is, again, not the researcher, but the interviewee. This is the interviewee talking. As you see, it finishes, right? This is about their experiences in school. So it's like, the teacher leaves again, waits for no answer. He sits by himself, table for one, just don't understand, I am 17. Right? Like they uses all the metaphors, the brackets, the sentences. It has all that sort of power that we would otherwise miss on a, say, content analysis. This is another example. This one I really like because this is, I would say, this is the first one that inspired me. I was telling Sylvia, the first author, Daphne Loads, she was the person that I would have supervised me, but she retired. And this is one poem that they did. The paper is on the experiences, but on the feedback, some sort of the evaluation of a grant. It's a very simple project. They wanted to evaluate the impact of funding research on scholarships. So this is subtle, right? Scholarship of teaching and learning in a university, and they wanted to evaluate the impact. And they thought, well, let's go into the stories of these people. So this is a poem that they created, the three researchers created, from the transcript of one of the interviews. This one is different. As you can see, it has full stops. It starts with a different sort of, with a capitalized letter, has commas. It has a bit more of narrative sense to it. They change stuff because you can, but also when you change stuff, it sounds quite poetic. Like when you say, I came here from elsewhere. Sounds kind of cool. Instead of saying, I came here from, say, I don't know, Lancaster. It's like, yeah, well, it's a place, but when you change it, and you can with that poetic license, it sounds much better. You can use stuff like, say, here you got a lot of autonomy, the boundaries are open, go and explore, go and develop yourself, right? So the money people say no. You would never put the money people. You would put something like the stakeholders or the finance department, blah, blah, blah. You would never say the money people in research, but this is how people talk. So, and it has that different connotations. It has that different impact. So you can have that licenses on with poetry, right? The other thing, and I want to come back to this on the top, right? On the top, this is one of the bits that I really like about art-based research, and I like in particular of how the field of poetic inquiry has developed, is that people are quite self-conscious. I told you at the beginning that this is, I mean, a lot of us are really amateur and we have little or none or intermediate knowledge of poetry. It's very rare that someone is really a good poet and also does this. So some of us feel the need to say, well, I am self-conscious about how to do this, right? And one really spoke to me, but all the others, sometimes the poems just don't resonate with the people, even with the authors, and that's part of the process. That's just how it is. So I like that part as well. This is a very recent one. Adrian Schoon is also a very well-known person, now more well-known than before, I would say, because he's recently published a few things. This one, again, as you can see, is very similar. They come from the same idea, the poetic transcript. You are looking at the same people reference. You can see it's a small niche, but what he does here that I like is that he's playing a bit more with form. So you can see people they don't really see what school was like for me, and they have that separation that is very, it is poetic to play with the form of how the words are presented. I've seen it differently, a bit more extreme. This is just a more sort of not so out there example. Plays with italics, right? They only see what the teachers see, what the teachers want them to see, right? So it has emphasis as well. It has with this indentation. I don't know how that's. I know the word in Spanish. I don't know it in English. But when you change this part, this part over here at the bottom and moving to the right, that also has sort of a different impact. So it's just another way of playing. But what I did in my research is that I went, coming from my own background in constructivism and postmodern philosophies and stuff like that, I wanted to do a bit more collective sense of poetic transcription. So I don't want to say that I coined the term, but I haven't seen it before. So I'll say that I coined it, but it's just a silly word before. Poetic transcription, which is joint. So we did it together jointly, right? So if poetic transcription involves interviewing participants and transcribing the conversation, creating poems, blah, 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 what I did is that basically I did the interview with the participants, then I did the transcription, but I shared it with them. So I read it, they read it, and then we came together and collectively we created the poems for my research. So the poems that we created are basically a bit of both of us, how we both read, how we both thought about the poem. We met in their offices mostly, a few times, sometime, I mean, anywhere between 2 to 4 or maybe 5 hours. And we just created the poems and talked. And when we talk, more things arise, and we decided to add them and wrote new stuff that wasn't from the transcript. We have all that liberty because the end point, let's say, piece of data is the poem. It's not the interview, it's not the transcript, it's the poem. So whatever we want to do to create that poem, it's just a longer process of creating the data. But whatever comes to that point, it definitely is something that they want to showcase. This is something that they want to push forward and that we do together. So I interviewed 11 early career academics at Lancaster University in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. So this is just in for the brevity, that's a word, of the presentation. I'll show you an extract from my research. This is Elizabeth, and the poem is called Wonder. This is just an extract. It's not the full thing. So this person, we had a different sort of feel to it. Some verses are a bit longer, some verses are shorter. You have in the middle, as you can see, let me put out the pointer, I think. How can I do that? I knew how to do that. Annotate. It's probably annotate. This one? Yeah. This one. Okay, can you see the dots, the red dots? Okay. So as you can see on top, you have the longer verses, and they create stanza, and then this next stanza is different, and you can pinpoint that with a slight change in font. But why we did it differently was because when we were reading the whole thing, at times with Elizabeth, we were feeling that sort of romantic vibe, a bit of a romance into the experiences of teaching and learning how to teach. So we thought this bit with other bits can create a sort of sonnet. So we thought, okay, let's do like a trick. Let's play a bit with this. We have the full form, and if scattered over the full poem, you have this sonnet that if you take out, you have a very purely love letter, say, to teaching. So we did that very intentionally. Then in the third stanza that you see here, I also like this one. I like this one because it reminds me of her. It reminds me of Elizabeth, to be honest, because it was quite funny when she was saying this. And we both pick it up when she says, well, definitely take it very seriously, I know. And then who the hell is letting me do this? You just turn up and they say, teach this module. You can't really do anything wrong. They'll just love the fact that you're a real life practitioner. And they did. I mean, I could have been saying anything. I wasn't. I don't think I was. So it was really sort of, it has that funny impact to it. It has that sort of playful element to it. And you can't say, really say, there's a playfulness in teaching. I mean, you can say it, and you can say, no, well, the experiences of early career academics has a little bit of playfulness in it, but it definitely comes across differently when you read it from the voice of the people doing it. It's probably an experience that we've all had, but you can re-experience it when you hear it, when you read it like this. The cool part of doing poetic inquiry and these more creative elements is that you can really feel the participant. Like when I was doing the interview, and when we were doing the transcript and doing the poem, it was really funny because at some point you think, I felt that same thing. Maybe I didn't think about it in the exact same way, but at some point in my first class as a lecturer, I also thought, I could say anything. I don't have adult supervision, right? I'm like a child. And she says it in a way that really works for that to push forward that point. And then she reiterates, right? They said you don't have anything to worry about. So as you can see, it is a method that on the essence, on the core of it, it can provide a way of putting all these conflicting sort of strange, not really cohesive thoughts, not really cohesive things into an experience, into an art form, where the reality is that at the same time, we are feeling and we are thinking all these things. It's not as clear cut. It's not like you feel this, you feel this, you feel that, right? You feel them all together and you feel them in different ways. So this is one poem. They all say different things. But if you read them all, you have that idea, like an album. Like when you know this In the Wee Small Hours, the album from Frank Sinatra, very old album, but it's sort of one of the first albums to put together 10, 11 songs that they all talked about the same thing in different ways. You don't want to say this is the conclusion, because what you want is people to listen to the songs. You want people to read the poems, and maybe they'll come up with one bit, and that will be the most important bit for them, because that's the bit that they relate to and they can understand and they can complement or maybe extend. And that's the work of the audience, which we don't necessarily acknowledge that much in science, right? But that's the work of the audience. The audience goes to the gallery and says, you know, I saw 100 pictures today, 100 paintings, but I like that one the most. And I can talk about it and then whatever, right? It has that similar vibe. That doesn't mean that you cannot do a bit more analytical sort of process, like in the old-fashioned science, the sense of I have to have a PhD, so someone needs to examine me, and I have to have answers. That way, you can do a bit of that. But at the same time, the method pushes you to do it cautiously, because you can see all these nuances so clearly that you will think, you will say, well, this is a answer, one possible thing to think about these two poems or these three poems or the one poem or the one stanza or the one verse. And you can do all that shifts from levels, while at the same time understanding and being very mindful that it is unique in a sense, and it is situated, and it is relational to the participant, to the language, to the audience, to me, like the researcher. So yeah. So that's the presentation. I was told to keep it short. I'm sure I didn't manage to do it, but oh well, it is what it is.
Thank you very much for your very interesting introduction into this methodology. I think now we have plenty of time to discuss questions. And does anybody of you have questions for Felipe? Carla, yes, please. You're still on mute.
Now, yeah, I was trying to find the hand rise, but I just keep clapping, which yes, thank you, Felipe, for your presentation. It seems really interesting, and also because I'm a very quantitative person, which is difficult for me to understand the process, because as you said, I'm in the old-fashioned science way of doing research. So let me kind of summary up the way at least you do it, because I understood that there's different ways to approach it, and you show us the last slide how you did it. So let me see. So you focus on a topic, of course, of any one of us for research, and then you do interviews about it. And when you have the transcription of it, you kind of have a highlight the key verbatims, or at least you select the key information and drop the non-useful or non-significant one. And then with the interviewee, you both create a poem that shows kind of a different elements or categories, if you want to use the way to analyze qualitative data. So you do a poem that reflects on that, and you leave it that way, in a way that the reader, so us and other scientists, interpret everything, whatever, I don't know how to say, but the way you want to do it, the interpretation, right? Like in an art gallery, that you look at a picture or a painting and you say, I see flowers, and they will say, I feel sad, I don't know, right? So this kind of art thing. Is that the right way to summary up the process?
So I would say one of the things is that, so first, the only change that I would say is that I didn't preemptively selected anything. I just highlighted it, and we had the same full transcript. Because one of the interesting bits of meeting the participant and having that second round of interaction is that they highlight sometimes the same bits, and sometimes we highlight different bits, and that leads to a conversation. And in the conversation, we realize which bits are more important or less important, or we want to push forward or we don't. Sometimes we say, this bit was really interesting, but it's not really cohesive with the story. So it's like, okay, let's drop it. Or sometimes we say, this is, let's say I didn't find something particularly interesting, but they say, no, this was really important for me. Like, this is something that I felt it was key. So we go, oh, okay, let's go through it again. And it comes into the poem. So it doesn't say that I come with like a short version of the transcript. We go with the full thing because it's a prompt for conversation. And that goes sometimes verbatim, sometimes it gets transformed. And what you see in the poem is difficult to trace back into the transcript because sometimes it changes, sometimes it's the same. Because you can use poetic license to create a sort of experience. You can repeat stuff that were already said once. Or you can shorten or lengthen or make them rhyme or make like alliteration. So you use words that sound similar when you want to make it sound rougher or stuff like that. So you can have all that process, but it's all like talked through with the participant, right? And about the last part, when you say, so I leave it like that for people to just read and interpret. It is like that, and it isn't like that. Because when you go to a gallery and when you go to a museum, the idea of curating research, which is a big field, which I'm sort of trying to fit into my work, which would have been the second part of this talk, right? The idea of curating research would be that you have to be mindful of interpretations, but you also have to be able to inscribe the research in a certain field, in a certain pathway that makes sense. You want to make the artwork to make sense. If you go to a gallery and you don't understand anything, or you get out with anything, it's not a good gallery, because the gallery has a theme and they want to say, this is a gallery about prehistoric, I don't know, bones of whatever, right? Or this is a gallery of how the Ottoman Empire did whatever, or this is whatever, right? An art gallery about, I don't know, consumerism, blah, 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 right? So there are ideas, and then you go to one installation or one painting, and there is something there to tell you, to guide you, to help you, to literally to talk to you, so that you can understand, you can make sense of this. And you can disagree, you can agree. Maybe they'll say, look at the use of the color blue in this painting, and you'll say, oh, cool. And then you go to the next painting and they don't have to say it, because you can see, oh, you learned something. This is look, they're using blue. So you can understand something that you wouldn't have before. It's not to say that there is one interpretation, but what it says, what it helps, is that it sort of guides you through it in a sense that, in a way that makes sense. So that is what I'm doing right now. Right now, what I'm doing is that I'm crafting that experience. I'm literally curating that exhibition of the poems in a way that they stand as a piece. There is a bit of guide, not in an imperative way, but in a more suggestive way, that helps you see that why, say, there are 2 poems in one room and not 3. Why is it first these 2 and then the other 2? What can you say about this room, about this poem, about the whole exhibition, right? So you can use that analytical frame to aid the experience. This is not like a free-for-all thing, right? Even if you don't understand the rules, you go watch a game, like a football game, you wouldn't understand what's happening because you don't know the rules. No one's there. You can have a sort of context. It is a bit of that. It's a bit of putting into context, but not in a way that it is restrictive.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Özin.
Talk or the chat was really interesting because I would say I'm more a quantitative and traditional researcher, and this one is really interesting to hear about. My question is, do you have a research question in your head before starting with the interviews? Do you have prompts for the interviewees? What is your aim when you do these interviews?
So the aim of the interviews is the aim of the project. So the aim of the project is this, and I drafted a script, right? An interview script, a good old-fashioned interview script for qualitative research in any sense. And the script had a few iterations. So I did a first round of interviews with a pilot project to see if, and we did the poems and everything, to see if out of the whole process, I was able to answer in one way, or not to answer, but to address in one way or the other the main question, which is this one in the slide. So there is a bit of flexibility. I mean, I would say the other way around. There is a bit of structuredness. There is an aim, there is a purpose of doing this, but also the beauty of this is that because the question, as you can see, is broad, it's a question to explore, and it's a question that is personal, but at the same time universal. It has that sort of, this is what they feel, but it's also trying to how to say this, to provoke everyone in the process. So there is a bit of universality embedded in it, but it's also a bit of particularity embedded in it. And that it's quite difficult to navigate, but it's also super fun to navigate, because at some point the interview can go anyway, and sometimes the participants take longer in some questions because they're not questions. Let's say they're a point for conversation. They dive deeper into some elements of the conversation, and that's probably what they want to highlight from their own experiences of learning to experience teaching, right? So this is how they learned this. Some went really sort of deeply into mentoring programs. Others went into feedback, and others went. So people go into whatever they want to do. And that is how you can create these experiences that are relatable to all of them, because you want them to be true, but true in a way that is true to them as well as true to all, if that makes sense. It's like, I don't know, it's like doing an assignment when you say, let's talk about sadness. And you say, well, I use sadness a lot. Let's do another thing. Let's talk about happiness or anger, right? And people go with all sorts of different ways, but they get to the same point.
Just a follow-up question. Do you have then some lines like for the poem afterwards in your head, like saying if the participants say something like this or that, I would put that in the poem, or is that?
So to be fair, and this is being really, really honest, I did have to fight for a few lines because there were lines that I really liked, really liked, and that some of the participants were like, I kind of just said it. But so my background is psychology, so I'm rather skeptical about the "I just said it" phrase. So yeah, there are parts of it when you think, you read as a researcher, you read into the transcript and you read into the poem at times that they don't want to read into, and the other way around as well, that they really want to expand on a part that you say, well, I don't find it that interesting. So there is a bit of conversation and dialogue there where you have to be able to understand that you are talking to a human being and they want to, like, once you give them the power to say, this is, like, you are the author of this poem too, you have to be mindful that they can do with it whatever they want as well. It's not yours. And work with that. To be, I mean, in all honesty, and I'm kind of glad about this, all the bits that I really love are in the poems. And some of the bits that I didn't like at the moment now have really grown on me, and I like them now. So yeah, no, I don't. At times in the interviews, I was like, yes, we got into the things that I wanted to hear, but then in the transcript, sometimes they get transformed into something different, and they change. And at times you're disappointed. At times you're like really happy because some things that weren't appearing in the transcript then appear in the poem because they thought about it more. And the other thing is that this process is really, it's really meaningful for the participants. So the follow-up project that I'm doing with the methodology is that after the meetings and the poems already, I met again with the participants and we discussed about the process. We discussed about the poem creation and how it was and how they felt and if they learned anything and blah, blah, blah. And like all of them were really eager to talk about this stuff. Like after we finished doing the poem, like creating the poem, they would start, and I was like, wait, because we need to record this. So calm down. We'll have a meeting for this, because they really, it's something that really like moves people. So I mean, you have to be mindful of that as well, and you have to be honest about that as well, and give them that space that is rightfully theirs as participants of the research. I don't know if I answered the question, by the way. I think that I went sideways.
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. You went sideways. Carla, yes.
Yes, I have another one. Just very practical. How do you publish that? Because I'm imagining a paper, a journal paper, traditional one, with introduction with theory, the methodology, the results, and the discussion conclusions. So the poem that you create out of the data, does it go to the results or does it go to the conclusions? And the conclusion is what is used to guide the reader in the interpretation of the output of the different poems? Or how do you do that?
So I love the question, Carla, because it's a question that I haven't actually resolved all that much in my head as well. So firstly, I would say that going into conference is already a problem. So I would say doing a paper is definitely even more complicated, because conference also want to see that elements, and I don't necessarily have them or want to have them, in all honesty. So there are journals that are more experimental. So when you go to Frontline in educational research, I think is the name, or well, Frontline, right? They are happy to do more experimental bits. Definitely Qualitative Inquiry, the journal is super open to stuff like this. There are, I would say, newer, still really good. Like when you go Scopus, Q2, like Q2 level journals that are happy to make some exceptions and publish something that is interesting but has different structures. What I would say is that if from the get-go you have to be really explicit that this doesn't follow unstructured like the one you expect. This is not your typical paper. That's one thing. And the other thing is that once you challenge, so when you start doing poetic inquiry or art-based research, from the start, you start challenging some assumptions. One of them is the assumption of a result and a discussion. Because when you go in a very qualitative route with a very constructivist paradigm, it is difficult to distinguish between a result that is created and a discussion that is also created in a very similar manner. So at this point, I would argue that the poems are the results. In a way, they're also the discussion. So they are a bit mixed together, results and discussion. What I would do, so what I'm doing now, because I am working on how to put this, I'm not sure if the article route is the one that I want to follow. I might look into books as well, like booklets. But poems and, say, a discussion prompt or a commentary would work in a similar way as results and discussion. And then a conclusion that sort of elevates everything together would be similar to that little book that you read when you leave the gallery. There are sort of creative ways in between to do this stuff. I would really say from the get-go that you have to be mindful that this is not your typical paper and this is not your typical results. And some of us are a bit more feisty and would argue that all of the results are really created, and maybe no one should say these are the results of the research because you used one particular instrument that was created by particular people with a particular set of theories in mind or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like, you could argue both ways. But if you go for a more pacific route, if you just state on the top, like at the very beginning, like this is just something else, be ready to be surprised, be ready to engage. Like, you're not listening to a podcast, you're listening to something else, right? You're listening to a fairy tale, whatever. Like, academic writing doesn't have to be all that academic, and creative writing doesn't have to be all that creative, right? So there are nuances in between. And so yeah, I would say that to be fair, this is a growing field, and more journals are accepting different ways of publishing and different ways of constructing papers. And probably the qualitative research inclined journals are happy to publish stuff like this, because there is a group that would inscribe art-based research within qualitative research. I wouldn't, but some really do it. So yeah, it's not impossible, but it goes to the question, right? So when you publish a paper and you want to see relationships and causality, you're probably not going to go through these routes because it won't make sense. So as long as it makes sense, I think that the journals are quite keen to accept it.
Yes, but it's a pity that the art-based research is restricted to the academia, right? Because at the end, it's harmful for your career in a way. That you are supposed to have journal papers in high-ranking journals, blah blah blah, and because your kind of methodology so creative that doesn't fit the standards, it hurts, right? So that's why also a lot of us go to traditional research, quantitative. It's in a way easier to publish.
I mean, yeah, completely. It is easier, and it is probably, the thing is that when you follow a structure, and I don't want to say a recipe, but a structure, then you can master that structure. But it also probably gets boring at some point. Like, you see, and this is something that I've realized as entering the field, you see a lot of older scholars going through the art-based research route, and the younger scholars going through the more quantitative, more structured manner, because as you say, the publish or perish, and publish or perish sort of thing makes you to publish a lot. But my experience so far and the papers that I've read so far, it seems to me that there is space, as long as you're good at arguing how this fits into the scope of a journal and how this difference is actually a breath of fresh air into a journal, in which sense it can be well accepted. I am pleasantly surprised every time I talk about this stuff that people are really curious, and curiosity is a great emotion to elicit, because people do want to know more. They might disagree, which is not a problem, but if they don't want to engage and they're just bored and they don't want, I don't want to read this, that's, for me, that's problematic. Disagreeing is not as problematic. So I see that this really engages with the curiosity of people. Framing it that way to journals, it's a difficult route, but it's a difficult route for everyone. It's not just easy peasy publishing anyways. So I literally just got rejected from a paper. It's around journals, so it happens to everyone.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions left? I think we have time for one more question, if there is one. Actually, my questions are already asked, so I don't have any questions left. I was wondering about the validity of the results and the analysis, but you told that you're doing the interviews then together with the participants. So this is kind of process to validate your interpretations.
Yeah, so there is a concern in this method that is about validity. I would say probably there's this idea of trustworthiness that is more appealing to the qualitative researchers. If the results really are, are being interpreted in the way that they should be. But that is also kind of difficult to assume for loads of research, not just for this one. Because in a sense, when the fact that I'm doing 11 pieces that are different to each other and they talk to each other, they're not the same. They don't go to the same conclusion. They go to similar conclusions from different points. They don't have to be the same. So you have many different interpretations and you can say many different things. In a sense, that's super untrustworthy. But in a sense, it's super trustworthy because it means that you have been broad enough and skillful enough to convey many things in a result. But you have conveyed fewer. You can get to fewer conclusions, for example. Maybe the thing would be to question, do you want to get to one conclusion? Or do you want to get to many conclusions or to many possible conclusions? But that is an open question. That is an open question, not for me to resolve. And yeah, that's something that maybe people won't agree with and won't like. But if they go to the point to read that part of the paper, then I feel like I'm good with that. Like if they get to the point where they get to that point of the paper and they're angry and they say, no, we have to do this, and then for me it's like, okay, I already won. You read that far. It's like I'm happy.
Thank you very much. I really see the unique insights into you gain through your methods. Yeah, it's super interesting. It was completely new for me, this approach, and I think also for the others. So I think we're running out of time. So I guess if anyone has questions, I will provide your email address in the YouTube video below the video. And now I would like to come to an end. I would like to thank you again, Felipe, for your presentation, for sharing your experience. It was super interesting. And we wish you all the best for your future research.
Thank you, Sylvia. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you, Felipe, for sharing.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. And so that's all for now. Have a nice week and see you in Sevilla, Felipe.
See you.
See you. Bye.
Bye.